Hey everyone, welcome back to Here Apologetics. As always, brought to you by you with your support on Patron.com. I'm joined by Tim Stratton. He's a part of Thinking Ministries. He also wrote a book entitled Human Freedom, Divine Knowledge, and Mere Molinism, also known as the book with the best meme advertisements in the history of the world. But Tim, thank you so much for joining me. How are you?
I'm doing great. Zach, thank you so much for inviting me to be on your show today. I'm honored.
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to this conversation, just talking about how your free choice to watch this video may be evidence for theism. So talking about like free will and all these big questions surrounding that. So to start off, could you just like introduce yourself and talk a little bit about like who you are and what you do?
Yeah, well, I'm Dr. Tim Stratton. I have graduate degrees in both apologetics and theology. As you said, I'm the founder of Thinking Ministries, where our goal is to equip the church to engage the culture. You know, we want to help Christians know what they should believe and why they should believe it, and then to equip them to be able to rationally communicate these justified true beliefs to other Christians to support their faith and to strengthen their faith, and also to non-Christians to help them see the truth of Christianity and maybe have opportunities to share the gospel. So anyway, your audience can check out our website at freethinkingministries.com and also check out our podcast. It's called the Free Thinking Podcast. My co-host is Scott Olson there, and he's a philosophy grad student at Biola. And definitely check out our YouTube channel. Just search for Free Thinking Ministries, and you can find lots of content there. Oh, and I should say that much of my work is arguing for the existence of a certain kind of free will called Libertarian free will, and then showing how, as you hinted at, it's ultimately evidence for God's existence. And I did publish a book that you mentioned called Human Freedom, Divine Knowledge, and Mere Molinism. And here it is. And that's actually a modified version of my doctoral dissertation, and I discuss these things there. So
yeah, that's great content, and I love your YouTube channel. I just for the first time this spring started watching the Marvel movies. I just my friend started watching WandaVision. I was like, I want to know what's happening here because this is really good. So I watched all the movies, and I saw on your channel you have all these like Marvel references, and I'm like, I get this now. I felt so
right.
Yeah. So just to start off here, let's talk about the question of like what is free will and what is like libertarian free will? Because it's a big question, and there's a lot of things surrounding this. So how would you define free will, Tim?
Yeah, so I'm focused on not just free will, but libertarian free will. And I do try to cover all of my bases and offer multiple definitions of libertarian freedom in my book and on my website and other places. But there's many definitions to consider, and there's a lot of disagreements on these definitions of libertarian freedom. But as I explained in my book, let's see, this is what I said. Let me read it here. I said, libertarian freedom may be defined essentially as the conjunction of a rejection of compatibilism, which, side note, is a different way of looking at free will. So it's a rejection of, well, let me start over. Libertarian freedom may be defined essentially as the conjunction of a rejection of compatibilism, along with the claim that humans at least occasionally possess free will and or desert responsibility. So that is to say that the advocate of libertarian freedom affirms that people possess freedom of moral and rational responsibility, and that the freedom necessary for responsible action is not compatible with determinism. Thus, in simple terms, libertarian freedom sometimes refers to a categorical ability to act or think otherwise, and it always refers to source agency without any ultimate external causes. I say the former is sufficient for libertarian freedom, while the latter is necessary. And then recently, so that was from my book, but in a recent 50-page paper that I wrote, a response to a philosopher named Guillaume Bignon, great guy, but we disagree on this issue. He's an exhaustive divine determinist, so I call him an ED guy, EDD, an exhaustive divine determinist. And so we have a disagreement here. And in that response to him, you can find that on my website, I explained that the primary definitions of libertarianism that I seek to defend are twofold. So this is what I said in that paper. Quote, The first is what is referred to as sourcehood libertarian freedom, according to which, as I say in my book, libertarian freedom always refers to source agency without any ultimate external deterministic cause. The second definition of libertarian freedom is stronger and often referred to as a leeway-based approach or an alternative possibilities approach. As I noted on the 4th page of my book, one of the goals, at least whenever possible, was to argue for the stronger definition of libertarian freedom. And I phrase that as follows: the categorical ability or opportunity to choose among a range of alternative options, each of which is consistent or compatible with one's nature at the moment of choice. And it could also be expressed this way: the ability to choose, or even the opportunity to exercise an ability to choose among a range of alternative options, each of which is compatible with the agent's nature at the moment of choice, and the antecedent conditions are insufficient to causally determine the agent's choice. So that's a bunch of philosophical lingo there. But do you have any follow-up questions on any of my definitions?
No, so I think that one kind of good way that at least I think about free will, and maybe you can just kind of like refine my definition or say it's crazy or whatever. But I always think of free will as like libertarian free will in the sense is the ability to have done otherwise in like the same circumstances. Like say like I'm talking to you right now, and I have the ability to hang up the phone right now and end this broadcast and make everyone sad, hopefully. Or I can keep it going. So that's kind of how I kind of think about it. And it's like it can be the same exact physical circumstances, but I still have that choice. Is kind of at least a rough definition of how I think of it.
That is rough, and I think that's how most people think of it. Indeed, that's how I thought of it as I first started out thinking about these things. But what will really get you is it's possible if for some weird reason I don't have an ability to actually act otherwise. But nothing is, if it can be demonstrated that nothing is causally determining me, right? If there's if there's not someone or something else causally determining me, but if for some weird reason I don't have an ability to choose or act otherwise, well, it could still be said that I'm free in the libertarian sense. So what I say is, if one does possess the ability to choose or act, or what I'm most consumed with, the ability to think otherwise. If one has the ability to think, act, believe, or behave otherwise, then you do have libertarian freedom. That is, if you have the opportunity to exercise these abilities one way or the other. So if I did X, you really could have done not X. That's like that categorical ability to do otherwise. If you have that categorical ability, I call it a broad opportunity, then you have libertarian freedom. However, if I can't demonstrate that you have this broad opportunity to exercise an ability to do or think otherwise, as long as I can show that there's no causal strings attached, there's nothing causally determining you, then I can still show that you've got libertarian freedom. So I often vacillate. I'm kind of like an MMA fighter. Hey, if you take me down to the ground, I'll fight you. I'll do jujitsu. If you can't take me down, I'm going to kickbox you, and I'll go back and forth between the two, whatever serves my purposes.
It's humble of you to turn down your career as like UFC champion to do this free thinking ministry stuff. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, here's what's funny. I don't know if you know this, but I did used to do MMA. I fought professionally.
I think I saw that. Yeah.
And I was 1-1. I lost my last fight and broke my hand. I said, that's enough of that. And I coached for a while. And the current champion at 170 pounds right now in the UFC, his name is Kamaru Usman.
Yeah.
I used to coach him. So
really?
Yeah, he's awesome. So awesome. I mean, at this point, he's one of the best that the UFC has ever seen. And when he started training with us, he was really good. He was quite the athlete, but man, he is skyrocketed. Anyway, we're not here to talk about UFC.
Yeah, Kamaru Usman's an absolute beast. So it's interesting. But with regards to like the free will stuff, so let's talk about like just jumping around here a little bit. Why do you think we have free will? Obviously, in a minute here, we'll get into some like different arguments that you'll present to say like we do have free will. But like if you're going to give like an elevator pitch and sum it up to someone, it'd be like 60, 120 seconds. Like, why think that we have this like libertarian freedom? And I know I'm putting you on the clock here.
Yeah. Okay, that's tough. All right. All right. Number one, I think that Christianity is true. So that's the first reason.
Yeah.
And since I think that Christianity is true and that the Bible is the inspired word of God, and we have reasons to think that too. I could get into apologetics arguments for that. But since I think the Bible is the inspired word of God, and I also think the Bible is clear in both the Old Testament and the New Testament, I think the Bible is clear that humans possess libertarian freedom. That's one reason. Now, I know there's going to be Christians saying, no, the Bible says we don't. Okay, we'll have that conversation. I think I used to hold that position and I changed my mind. Okay. Number two, the second reason why I think we have libertarian freedom is I believe that morality is more apparent to us than the physical universe. And I've discussed this in the past. It's possible. The physical, we have a direct acquaintance with the physical universe, but it's possible that we're in the matrix, right? We can't rule that out. So it's possible that physical reality doesn't exist. However, even in the matrix, there seems to be some things that are really, or objectively speaking, good, bad, right, wrong, or evil that you shouldn't do, even if physical matter doesn't exist. So it seems to me that objective morality is more apparent to us than the physical universe. Now, with that said, if we possess these moral obligations in an objective sense, then we've got to have libertarian freedom. And I argue for that in my book. And by the way, Dr. David Baggett, who is considered to be the world's foremost expert on the moral argument, he agrees with me. In fact, I just interviewed him on my YouTube show last week. And I encourage you got to get him on your show sometime. I'm sure he'll be happy to come on. But people want to watch that and go to my YouTube channel. And anyway, my point is, we have objective moral obligations. We ought to think and act in some manners and ought to avoid thinking and acting in other manners. And I think I believe that requires libertarian freedom. Now, another reason to think that we have free will is regarding the philosophy of love. I've done a lot of work regarding the philosophy of love, and I'm convinced that true love, or at least what I call the best kind of love, requires libertarian freedom. So then if one believes that it's possible to experience true love with God or anyone else, then one ought to believe that we possess libertarian freedom. But finally, although those are three really good reasons to think that humans possess libertarian freedom, there seems to be one argument that supersedes all the other reasons. And that reason is the ability to reason. So I offer a syllogism known as the free thinking argument, which deductively concludes that we possess libertarian freedom. So I guess bottom line, if one believes they can rationally infer better and true beliefs over false beliefs, and they believe that they can rationally affirm claims of knowledge, right? That they have the opportunity to rationally affirm claims of knowledge, then they ought to reject the idea that everything about humanity is always causally determined by something or someone else. They ought to affirm libertarian freedom. So that's four reasons why I think we ought to reject exhaustive determinism and affirm at least a limited libertarian freedom.
Yeah, it's interesting because at least like in my experience, I always just assumed that like even before I got interested in like apologetics, philosophy, all these things, I just always assumed that like free will was a real thing. Like it just seems intuitively obvious that we do have this freedom. We couple with the arguments, it becomes a lot of fun to think about. So look, my question for you is: did people freely choose to watch this video, Tim?
Well, I think most people probably did. That is to say, I don't think most people are causally determined by something or someone else to watch this video. So if that's the case, then one freely chooses in the libertarian sense to watch this video. But there could be a few out there who are causally determined to watch it. I'm not going to rule that out because for my purposes, I only argue for limited libertarian freedom. And that simply means that at least on occasion, at least sometimes, something or someone else does not causally determine everything about me. Namely, what I'm really interested in is at least sometimes something or someone else doesn't causally determine all of my thoughts and beliefs and my evaluations and judgments right? I'm the kind of thing who has the ability to freely think, right? I'm a free thinker.
Mhm.
Atheists like to call themselves free thinkers. They don't have logical access to that term, but I think that the Christian view of humanity does. A biblical view of humanity, we have logically consistent access to the term free thinkers. So yeah, I think that there's some things about me that are causally determined, but I'm not responsible for those things. I shouldn't be held praiseworthy or blameworthy for those types of things. But there's some kinds of things in which I'm not causally determined, and it's these kinds of things in which I do deserve, or at least I could deserve, praise or blame. So I say we are responsible in a desert sense for those things that could be one way or the other, or that were not causally determined by something or someone else. I'm responsible in a desert sense for those things. And by desert sense, I'm not talking about food that tastes really good.
Yeah.
I'm talking about deservings. What do we deserve? Do we deserve to be held accountable for a certain thought or action? Do we deserve to be praised for a certain thought or action? That's the kind of thing that I'm interested in.
Yeah, that's great. So when you're talking about like maybe like a limit, at least like arguing for at least like a minimum of like a limited libertarian freedom, is this referring specifically to maybe like significant moral choices, like maybe choosing like to like follow God or not, or maybe to like commit some sort of like terrible atrocity or not? And that's kind of like this where this libertarian freedom you really think kicks in, whereas like maybe my decision to choose something from like the right shelf rather than the left shelf, maybe that's just me kind of like going by like a causally like determined like kind of structure.
Yeah. So that's a great question. So now, while I personally think that when it comes to salvation issues, I believe that we have libertarian freedom, and I argue for that in my book and on my website and YouTube channel, everywhere else. But for the sake of argument, trying to build bridges with other Christian theists who disagree with me, I will show how even like with Calvinists, how you can hold to a 5-point tulip Calvinism and still affirm mere Molinism. And I quote the original reformers in my book and elsewhere, showing that they really seem, maybe they weren't always consistent, but they definitely offer a lot to, they gave me some great quotes, which really seemed to affirm a libertarian freedom in things not related to salvation issues. I think the reformers were pretty clear that, with what we now call irresistible grace, right? If irresistible grace is true, the eye of tulip, then we don't have freedom. We don't have an ability to resist irresistible grace by definition, right? So salvation matters or soteriological issues would be causally determined by God, and therefore we don't have any libertarian freedom when it comes to those things. But I think Luther and Calvin and Melanchthon were clear that in things not related to salvation issues, we do have libertarian freedom. So I would point people to my book there and some of my articles. But now, if that's the case, even if I granted for the sake of argument that we do not have libertarian freedom when it comes to soteriological issues, but we do have libertarian freedom over the mundane issues or what they might call of external matters. If that's the case, and then we've still got limited libertarian freedom. It's limited to some things, but not all things. Now, I think that's the case anyway. Even if we do apply it to salvation issues, I have limited libertarian freedom. I don't have the ability to choose if I'm going to grow a full head of hair, but I do have the ability to choose.
It's coming. I believe it.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe in my my resurrected body, I'll have hair like Thor. Now that you're watching the Avengers, but I do have the choice to shave the rest of it off, right now. So
Mhm.
I think that's limited libertarian freedom. So I don't know if that answers your question or not.
No, I think it does. So I appreciate that, and it's interesting because with all these things, there's so many different perspectives. And I really enjoy kind of like your arguments and your work because you're trying to find common ground that like maybe like the Calvinist and the Molinist and Arminians, like we can all
Yeah.
get together and say, here's some things we agree on or could agree on.
Yeah,
So
that's right. I do spend basically a chapter in my book trying to build bridges with my Calvinist brethren. I used to be a hardcore 5-point Calvinist and an exhaustive divine determinist myself. And so it took quite a bit before I finally changed my mind. Or else we'll just say that God causally determined me to change my mind. But then that would be kind of weird and raise many other questions. So maybe
we'll
get
just
into
kind of
that
bury
later.
those and never answer them.
I
But
do
no,
like to talk. I will talk about them, but I don't know if you want to do it now. So
yeah. No, I do like the idea of we're getting a little off track here, but I do love the idea of like building bridges. Like I'm sure you're familiar with Josh Rasmussen. And he's the nicest guy alive, in my opinion.
yeah.
I mean, like he's very big, especially like he does a lot of talking with like atheists and stuff about like building bridges. Because I think especially like online we can get into like, oh, it's Calvinism versus Arminianism or Molinism, or like it's the Christian versus the atheist, or like things like that. But like if we think about it, it's really all of us kind of like coming from these different perspectives, just seeking truth. So a little bit different here, but I just like I heard that and I just like, yes, that's exactly what we need, is building bridges and working together and not getting so like dogmatized about all these things.
Well
So
said.
yeah. So the next thing I have for you is kind of getting into like the big meaty stuff right here. It's talking about like the implications of like free will with like the theism atheism debate. So in a minute here we'll get into like certain arguments like for or against free will and like objections and such. But like why, how does this like libertarian freedom play into the whole theism and atheism debate? Why do you think it provides some evidence for the existence of God having this libertarian freedom?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, all right. So I've got this syllogism that I guess I've kind of become known for because I talk about it all the time, and kind of named my ministry after it. It's called the free thinking argument, right?
Yeah.
And so with the free thinking argument, that deductively concludes that humans possess libertarian freedom, right? So, and that gets us, because it's talking about rationality and the ability to rationally infer better and true beliefs over false ones, and the ability to rationally affirm claims of knowledge. And anyway, so that's just a 3-step syllogism, 2 premises and 1 conclusion. And the conclusion is therefore humans possess libertarian freedom, basically. So now I've expanded that argument by adding 2 additional premises, which deductively leads to 2 additional conclusions and 1 abductive conclusion. So it's a bit longer than the 3-step argument, but by expanding the argument, because the core of the argument, what I call those 3 steps, the 2 premises and 1 conclusion, it says nothing about God. So the atheists, there are atheist philosophers who, there's a few of them. I would say they're in the minority, but there's a few real good ones like John Searle and Evan Fales. There's some others that affirm the ability to freely think in the libertarian sense because of rationality and knowledge issues. So the atheists can affirm that core of the free thinking argument against naturalism, which is an expanded version. However, with this expanded version, that the atheists are going to, or the naturalists anyway, is going to have a harder time with this one. I'll say it like that. So not only does it show that naturalism is false, or I can run a different version and show that it's at least probably false, but I can then show that it points to the existence of God, or that God is the inference to the best explanation. And I actually argue that the biblical view of God is the inference to the best explanation after considering all the data. So anyway, I call this the free thinking argument against naturalism. I've worded it in several different manners. Here's one that I'll give you the latest. This one's not even in my book, but I think this one is kind of easier for beginners to understand.
Mm-hmm.
So when I talk about nature here or naturalism, so naturalism is the view that only nature exists. And so by nature, I'm referring to the kind of stuff that scientists can directly test or discover.
It's like the materialistic picture of reality is kind of what you're thinking.
Yeah. There's always pushback, like that's not what I mean about natural. That's not what I mean by that word. Okay, we can use the physicalist view of the universe or a materialistic view. I often use those words interchangeably, unless somebody says that's not how I use it. Then I say, okay, tell me what word you want me to use, and I'll use that. Right. So, but by the word nature, I'm referring to the kind of stuff that scientists test and discover, or could possibly test and discover. So with that in mind, here's an argument. All right, premise one: if naturalism is true, then only nature exists. So that's true by definition. There's no souls, angels, demons, or God. Arguably, there's not even abstract objects. It's only physical kinds of stuff exist if naturalism is true. So again, the premise is if naturalism is true, then only nature exists. I mean, that's, like I said, that's true by definition. Premise two: if there is no supernatural aspect of humanity, then everything about humanity, including all thoughts and beliefs, would be causally determined by the forces and events of nature, i.e. physics and chemistry. 3, if all things about humanity, including all thoughts and beliefs, are causally determined by the forces and events of nature, then it's impossible for humans to rationally infer best explanations over false beliefs and rationally affirm knowledge claims. 4, it is possible for humans to infer better and best explanations over false beliefs and rationally affirm knowledge claims. And I contend that it's self-defeating to offer knowledge claims against this premise. So you got to hold that one. All right, now we've got some deductive conclusions that follow. 5, therefore, not all things about humanity are causally determined by the forces and events of nature. 6, therefore, a supernatural aspect of humanity exists. You can call it whatever you want. I call it a soul or an immaterial mind, but if somebody doesn't like those words for whatever reason, you can call it a shmol. I don't care what you call it. But it's an aspect of humanity that is other than nature. All right, 7, another deductive conclusion. Therefore, naturalism is false because souls or immaterial minds exist, or whatever you want to call it. All right, so then those are 3 deductive conclusions. So we got not all things are causally determined by, or not all things about humanity are causally determined. All right, what does that mean? That means you've got libertarian freedom. The next deductive conclusion is there is something supernatural or other than nature about you. And therefore, if that's the case, then naturalism is false, which is the most common view of atheism. Now, I do provide an abductive conclusion then. This is step 8. And so I've been dealing with what it takes to make an inference to the best explanation in the deductive argument. But now I add abductive, and I say, speaking of inference to the best explanation, the best explanation of the existence of a supernatural aspect of humanity is God, and the biblical view of God seems to make the most sense. Now, that's really the beginning of another argument, but let me quickly defend the premises of that argument. The first 3 steps of the syllogism are rather straightforward. So in summary, premise 1, as I already noted, it's true by definition. Again, if naturalism is true, nature is all that exists. Premise 2 is tantamount to, if all that exists is nature, then everything about humanity is causally determined by the forces of nature, the initial conditions of the Big Bang, and perhaps some quantum events, all of which are outside of human control. 3 expresses the fact that if all things are causally determined, then that includes all thoughts, all beliefs, all evaluations, and all judgments, right? So something or someone else is causally determining the way you think about the things I'm saying right now, right? That's not up to you. It's up to something else. So if all of a person's thoughts, beliefs, evaluations, and judgments are always forced upon the person, and she has no opportunity to be more careful and to choose better thoughts, beliefs, evaluations, or judgments, then she's simply left assuming that her determined she's left assuming that her determined thoughts, beliefs, evaluations, and judgments are good, and that her beliefs are true. But therefore, if that's the case, then one could never rationally affirm that her beliefs really are the inference to the best explanation. This can only be assumed, and this assumption would likewise be causally determined and forced upon her by something other than her. So, as I like to say, stealing from William Lane Craig, and he's talking about this exact topic here. He says, once you come to realize this, a sense of vertigo is warranted, because everything you think, even this thought itself, isn't up to you. It's up to something else. It's either up to physics and chemistry, or if you're, or God, or Loki from the Avengers, the deity of deception, or the god of mischief. I don't know, something, a mad scientist, something or someone other than you is causally determining exactly what you think and exactly how you think about it, how you judge something, how you evaluate an argument or a premise or anything I say. You're not in control of what you think about my claims and my arguments and my premises here. Something else is. And that's a problem when you come to see that that's something else on the naturalistic view isn't a thinking thing. It's not a rational thing. So something else that is non-rational is causally determining all of your thoughts and beliefs. That doesn't make sense. Now you've got a big rationality problem here. So bottom line, I'll just say that it's the paramount concern for the atheistic naturalist, right? Because if they affirm that if they affirm the exhaustive determinism of humanity, if determinism is true, then atheists or anybody else for that matter cannot possess justification for their belief in atheism or naturalism. And justification seems to be required for knowledge. At least that's what the majority of epistemologists affirm. And if that's the case, then the atheist or the naturalist cannot possess knowledge based upon justification either. So it seems to follow that if the naturalist knows that naturalism is true, then naturalism is false. So I think it makes much more sense to conclude that naturalism is false and that God or things like God, such as souls, exist. Now, here's the bottom line. If you believe that you are a rational free thinker who is not ultimately mind controlled by something else, then you should reject atheistic naturalism and affirm that both God and soul exist. So anyway, that's the free thinking argument against naturalism in a nutshell. But I often just use the two premises and the first deductive conclusion, and I just call that the free thinking argument. And I can use that just to prove logically that libertarian freedom is possessed by humans when it comes to thinking. But then you can expand it and go after naturalism and things like that.
Yeah, that's great. At least the way, like, I kind of think of it, is I think about maybe the different ideas with the foundation. And we have the atheistic naturalistic picture of the foundation, where we're gonna have something like a quantum vacuum or the initial state of the universe, and we have this physical thing that's responsible for everything else. And it would kind of logically follow that it would also follow for things like you and me and our minds, or the minds we think we have at least. So I see that picture, and then I see the theistic picture, where we have a mind at the fundamental nature of reality, and it would explain things like how we could have rational minds and things like that. So do you think that's pretty a fair kind of way of looking at it, at least in your opinion, Tim?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a conditional statement here that if I am a being created in the image and likeness of God, and I think a great way to do that, I mean, we can use scripture to see what God is like. God is spirit. God created the entire universe. So if we start to, think about the Kalam cosmological argument as well, and that gets you back to the cause and creator of the universe, logically prior to creation, logically prior to the existence of the universe, when we do a conceptual analysis of the cause of the universe, we start to see that the cause of the universe is a supernatural, immaterial thinking thing with free will. And I discuss this at length in my book as well. But then when you think, okay, if that's what it means to be created in the image and likeness of God, so if God creates us as immaterial beings who have bodies but can exist apart from our bodies, which is my view, it's called substance dualism. Point people to J.P. Moreland on that. But that really seems to make sense of saying that the thing that I call I, it's not my body. I have a body, but I can exist apart from it. And someday I'll get another body, like mine will have hair, right? Like Thor.
Hopefully.
Oh yeah, we'll see. If not, I'm cool with this. But yeah, if I'm the kind of thing that can exist apart from my body, then I think that the Christian view here, which is a commonly held view of within Christendom, it really makes sense then that I could be the type of thing that is designed with the ability and opportunities to think carefully on things. I can take my thoughts captive before they take me. I can choose to step back and evaluate my presuppositions, right? But if they're all causally determined and forced upon me, then I have zero opportunities to ever think otherwise, right? If I'm causally determined to happily affirm a false belief by physics and chemistry or God or anything else, then I have zero opportunity to infer a better or true belief. So say goodbye to inference to the best explanation, if that's the case. If something else other than me causally determines me to affirm a false belief, I have zero opportunity to infer a better or true belief. And so a rational agent is the kind of thing that has the ability to rationally infer better and true beliefs over false beliefs. But that agent is gone if exhaustive determinism is true.
Yeah, that's great. So I think right now would be a good point to kind of transition into some of like the certain arguments for free will. So we talked about your free thinking argument a little bit, but there's three more we'll try to get through at least. Okay. And the first one is this idea of like moral accountability. I was actually talking with like an atheist who's like big in like quantum physics, and he thinks this is one of the better arguments for free will because it's like this whole moral accountability thing. So what are your thoughts on moral accountability as an argument for libertarian freedom?
Yeah, like I alluded to earlier, if we do not possess libertarian freedom, then you can't really say there's any oughts about our thoughts or our following actions. There's no oughts there. So I think there's many reasons why the atheist or the naturalist can't affirm objective morality. However, well, I just say that one of those reasons is the naturalist has a hard time trying to affirm libertarian freedom. In fact, most reject it. But it seems, like I said earlier, we have this direct acquaintance with the moral fabric of the universe, which I think is stronger than the physical fabric of the universe. After all, we could be in a matrix, but even if we were, there's some things that are really right and wrong, even if all we were, if we really did exist in a matrix. So with that in mind, in my book, I offer what's called the oughts and thoughts argument. And here's another 7-step argument. So sorry for my long syllogism, but it goes like this. Premise 1, if naturalistic or divine determinism is true, then libertarian free will does not exist. 2, if libertarian free will does not exist, then libertarian free thinking does not exist, right? And I'm talking about the opportunity to ever think otherwise. 3, if libertarian free thinking does not exist, then moral oughts about our thoughts and following actions are illusory, as it would be impossible to ever think otherwise about anything. If something or someone else causally determines you to affirm a false belief, then there are no opportunities available for you to think otherwise, like we just talked about. Yeah. All right. So premise 4, moral oughts about our thoughts and following actions are not illusory, right? We know that it was objectively wrong for Hitler to think he should kill millions of Jews or even one Jew, right? And we know that it's we ought not think or we ought not have racist racist thoughts, and we definitely ought not act on those racist thoughts. That is objectively evil, right? So there are, I'm just saying there moral oughts about our thoughts are not illusory. Okay. So that is to say they exist. All right. So now we've got some deductive conclusions. 5, therefore, libertarian free thinking exists. We are free thinkers in the literal sense, in the libertarian sense. 6, therefore, libertarian free will exists, right? We have libertarian freedom. Finally, 7, therefore, both naturalistic and divine determinism are false. So if all thoughts are causally, or, if all thoughts are ultimately caused and determined by something or someone beyond human control, then humanity is not responsible in a desert sense for our thoughts or any action that is as a result of a certain thought. So this is a problem because, since human action, at least the actions for which a person is deemed morally responsible, they seem to follow from our thoughts. So if we're not free thinkers and a certain thought causes an action, then I don't see how we can be responsible. Right? Something else causes a thought in me, which causally determines an action, then that something else should be blamed, not me. Now, Christopher Yuan, I think he's from Moody Bible.
Yeah, he is.
So I quoted him in my book, and he said, thoughts precede action, good theology, right action, bad theology, wrong action. Now, with that in mind, let's think about what Paul taught. Let's see. So Paul, in 2 Corinthians 10:5, he commands us to take our thoughts captive to obey Christ, right? To obey reality. It's one of my favorite verses in all of Scripture because it gives us a reason to see the importance of apologetics and destroying objections that are raised against the knowledge of God. But then he goes further and he says, and we take our thoughts captive to obey Christ. And Christ, according to Paul, when you look at Colossians 1:16, he sees Christ as ultimate reality. Jesus is God, right? Jesus created physical reality and the rest of reality, but Jesus is ultimate reality. So when Paul says we take our thoughts captive to obey Christ, he is saying we take our thoughts captive to obey reality. And now think about the nature of truth. Not only does Jesus refer to himself as the truth, but a statement that is true corresponds to reality. So anyway, we are commanded to take our thoughts captive. We have all kinds of thoughts. I call them popping thoughts that come into our head that we don't necessarily have control over, right? Maybe something else causally determines some of these popping thoughts. But Paul seems to think that we have the ability to dwell on these bad popping thoughts or not. We can reject them. We can take them captive, as it were, and put them in jail, right? To obey Christ, to obey reality. Paul also tells us in Colossians 2:8, he warns us that we can be taken captive by bad thinking. So, I mean, what's he saying here? It's like you can take thoughts captive or they can take you captive. It's your choice, right? So that's the spiritual battle. You're not a passive cog at the mercy of the whims of a deity of deception or physics and chemistry, right? You are an active agent who contributes to your ultimate set of beliefs, right? But if you're not, I mean, look, if you're an active agent who contributes to your ultimate set of beliefs, then congratulations, you've got libertarian freedom. But if you do not have libertarian freedom to think, then you're nothing but a passive cog, albeit a passive conscious cog that is simply at the mercy of the whims of what seems to be a deity of deception. And the Christian ought to reject that. And even if you're an atheist, then you're still at the mercy of the whims of the initial conditions of the Big Bang and physics and chemistry and some quantum mechanics or what have you. That seems to be a bad place. But anyway, let me get back to Paul. Paul tells us in Romans 12:2 that we can be transformed by the renewing of our minds. We can be transformed by, and I think this is so true. If you choose to take bad thinking captive before it takes you, your physical brain will change. In fact, Jeffrey Schwartz from UCLA has led this. This is scientific research that shows that Paul was onto something 2,000 years before science finally caught up. And that is the way that we freely choose to think. It actually changes your physical brain structure. It can be really hard to take certain thoughts captive. For the addict, let's say somebody is addicted to pornography. They wake up and their brain is screaming at them to go look at it or whatever else they're addicted to. But it's been demonstrated that you can, no matter how hard it is, it's really hard sometimes, but you can take that thought captive and arrest it, if you were, or as it were. Arrest it, put it in prison, destroy it. Now, if you do that once, it's probably not going to transform you by the renewing of your mind. It's like going to the gym and lifting weights. If you go once, it's not going to really transform your body. But if you make a habit, if you say, I'm going to make a commitment and make this a habit to take my thoughts captive, even if I lose on occasion, I'm going to stand up, dust myself off, keep fighting that good fight, right? I mean, this is just the story. This is the New Testament story, right? But you can take your thoughts captive. And if you make it a habit and like you go to the gym 3 to 5 days a week, after that first week, you're not going to have much to show for it. But man, in 6 months, you will be radically transformed by the renewing of your physical body and your muscles, right? I mean, you'll see a difference in 6 weeks, but in 6 months, you will be a different person if you go to the gym and make that a habit multiple times a week. Now, similarly, with the way we think, thoughts are immaterial. You can't weigh a thought. A thought doesn't weigh anything. You can't smell it. You can't touch it. It's not a physical type of thing. It seems to be something that is other than nature. But the way we freely choose to think actually change the physical structure of our brains and our brain chemistry. I point people to the work of Dr. Jeffrey Schwartz from UCLA. Science finally caught up to what Paul was preaching 2,000 years ago, that if you take your thoughts captive to obey Christ, and you do that enough, and you don't let bad thinking take you captive, then you will be transformed. You will be a new person. You will be transformed by the renewing of our minds. Indeed, your physical brain structure will actually change, and that's backed up by science. So anyway, bottom line, if there are objective oughts about our thoughts, then it makes no sense to think that a deity of deception causally determines all false beliefs. And indeed, all false theological beliefs would be causally determined all the time that anybody ever has, from a non-Christian to a Christian. Because surely I don't know any Christian that's infallible and has every thought correct. So that would even mean that Christians, when we hold false theological beliefs, are causally determined by God to hold false theological beliefs. So I think it makes much more sense to realize that at least many times, at least on occasion, bad thinking is our fault. Right? We had the ability not to think incorrectly, and we failed to take that opportunity. I mean, think about it. If God causally determines all my thoughts and beliefs and all of my evaluations and all my judgments, then if I'm wrong about this, it's because God causally determined me to happily affirm a false theological belief. And that's really strange, considering the fact, like I said earlier, I used to fight for exhaustive divine determinism. But why would God causally determine me to think correctly in the past and then zap me or do whatever he does and causally determine me to affirm and advance false theological beliefs? So let me share one more little syllogism here. This is only 3 steps. And I think this truth can be expressed this way. 1, if God causally determines Jack to affirm false theological beliefs, then God is not a maximally great being, right? He's a deity of deception. But 2, God is a maximally great being. 3, therefore, God does not causally determine Jack to affirm false theological beliefs. That's Jack's fault. Now, why is this Jack's fault? Because he had the ability to take thoughts captive. He had the ability to be careful, but he wasn't. He didn't take advantage to seize that opportunity, even though it was available. Now, that's libertarian freedom. So anyway, if God causally determines all thoughts, actions, beliefs, and behaviors, evaluations, and judgments all the time, then humans really get off the hook, as it were. And I say, look, I think scripture is clear that we ought to take responsibility for our thoughts and actions. So don't say the devil made me do it. Don't blame physics and chemistry. Don't blame your DNA, right? Whatever you do, don't say that God made me do it. Don't say that God is the author of sin. No, take responsibility. You sinned, and you could have taken the way of escape that Paul discusses in 1 Corinthians 10:13. So anyway.
Yeah, no, that's great. Appreciate going through that. The next thing I have for you is an argument that could be used for free will, but people may also use it against it. It's this idea of like, what does the Bible say? Because, you know, some people will say, well, the Bible clearly teaches libertarian freedom, or like, Tim, haven't you read like Romans 9 or Ephesians 1? And it's
Right.
obvious that determinism is true. So do you want to just kind of like just survey just very briefly here, obviously, because there's a lot here. But like, what do you think about like the biblical argument for free will? Like, why do you think it supports it? And why do you think it doesn't like make the case that some determinists may think it does?
Well, first thing I want to do is, because I'll keep this quick. So I'm going to point people to my book, and the entire second chapter is about scripture. And I look at a lot of the passages of scripture that at face value seem to point to determinism. And then I look at so many other passages, and I would say I used to think there were more passages that seemed to imply determinism than libertarian freedom. And now, after my survey, I say, no, there's a lot more that, at least at face value, would imply libertarian freedom. Be that as it may, there seems to be some passages that are quite confusing. So the one that I like to hang out on, and I just mentioned it, is 1 Corinthians 10:13. So let's hang out there for a little bit. And now I say, look, 1 Corinthians 10:13 is written by the same guy who wrote Romans 9. So let's keep that in mind. Here's an argument, a short syllogism based on 1 Corinthians 10:13. Premise 1: if Christians possess the opportunity to exercise an ability to choose among a range of alternative options, each compatible with their regenerated nature at a given moment, then Christians possess libertarian freedom. Premise 2: at the moment of temptation, Christians possess the opportunity to exercise an ability to choose between giving into temptation or to take the way of escape God promises to provide in 1 Corinthians 10:13. Conclusion: therefore, Christians possess libertarian freedom. Now, 1 Corinthians 10:13, I say at least, heavily implies that when faced with temptation, Christians have an opportunity to exercise an ability to escape sin or not. That is to say that Christians possess the ability to choose between giving into temptation or to take the way of escape that God promises to provide. So that means then, since Christians still sin, every time a Christian sins, they could have done otherwise. They could have taken the way of escape that God gave them. So this is, we talked about the different definitions of libertarian freedom earlier, and that all I have to show is that if somebody is not causally determined at a certain moment when they choose, that they chose freely in a libertarian sense. But Paul is implying something even stronger, like you said, an ability, an opportunity to exercise an ability to do otherwise here. So that's a pretty strong argument based on biblical data. Now, if exhaustive divine determinism is true, then an opportunity to exercise this ability simply does not exist. If one possesses no opportunity to escape temptation, then surely one should not be blamed for being causally determined to sin by something or someone else, right? There is simply no opportunity to do anything to the contrary. So I've written about this a lot in my book. People can also go to my website. I have an article called Molinism is Biblical, and there I spend half of it just discussing libertarian freedom. So half of it is why libertarian freedom is biblical. But there's many other passages of scripture, both Old and New Testament. And I would just encourage people to go to my book to see all of those other passages. But I think 1 Corinthians 10:13 is my favorite. It's at least the one I like to start with.
No, that's a great place to start. Just thinking about it as you were talking. I have one more objection for you, and then we'll do a little bit of Q&A. So if you have questions, feel free to put those in. And if you send them a super chat, that's always appreciated. But my last question for you here, from my perspective, or from, I don't believe this, but just kind of like the last thing from my list here is that could we have just evolved in a way that allowed for like rational decision making? So we think about this in kind of like evolutionary terms. The person that can kind of like make the decision to eat the good apple that isn't poisonous is gonna like be more likely to survive and reproduce. So it seems like, at least from like an evolutionary perspective, we kind of be wired towards like understanding truth and such. So how would you respond to this kind of objection that evolution would kind of undermine this idea of like free thinking? We don't really need it. So what are your thoughts here, Tim?
Yeah, no, I think, well, look, I mean, Alvin Plantinga offers an argument that's quite similar to mine, but it's not identical. He refers to his as the evolutionary argument against naturalism. Mine is the free thinking argument against naturalism. So his is the EAAN, and I affirm it. Mine is the FAAN. I affirm his argument, and in my recent 50-page paper I wrote, I discussed this, and I show that if one affirms the EAAN, they ought to affirm the FAAN. But the free thinking argument against naturalism, I think, is stronger than the evolutionary argument against naturalism in a sense. In fact, here's what's interesting. I spent a lot of time on the local university here, the University of Nebraska at Kearney, and one of the evolutionary biologists there, she's I shared Plantinga's argument with her. She didn't find it persuasive at all. She had all kinds of pushback against it. I felt like it didn't even nudge her, her beliefs toward theism at all, or against naturalism at all. But then I gave her the free thinking argument against naturalism, and let her wrestle with that. And to this day, that was several years ago, she says to this day, the free thinking argument is what she could not wrestle with. She said it ultimately defeated her, as it were, and she realized that naturalism had to be false if she was going to consider herself to be a rational scientist. And then she realized that theism made the best explanation of that, and ultimately that the biblical view of God made the best explanation of that. So today, she is a Christian theist, a proud Christian theist.
Praise God.
Yeah, she's still an evolution professor who's teaching her students that Christianity is true and that there's no contradiction between the two. So it's really pretty cool. So she wasn't moved at all by the evolutionary argument against naturalism, but she was by the free thinking argument, because she realized that here's why she wasn't moved by Plantinga's argument, because she did say, well, look, if my belief forming faculties are aimed at survival on evolution, then it seems to be the case that beliefs that correspond to reality, i.e. true beliefs, would help one survive most of the time. So on evolution, our beliefs aren't selected for truth, they're selected for survival. But true beliefs would tend to allow one to survive most of the time. But Plantinga and others like to give thought experiments about why holding false beliefs at times will help you survive. So there's some undercutting defeater there a little bit. But when she realized that, wow, if naturalism is all there is, and that not just evolution, but everything about me right now, that everything about every human right now at this instance is ultimately causally determined by something other than me, namely a non-thinking thing. If that's causally determining all of my thoughts and beliefs, and I have no ability to rationally infer a better or true belief over a false belief, then you got major problems. So anyway, I would, if somebody is going to affirm or offer the objection that, look, I'm evolved to think rationally. Okay, well, great. You're probably evolved to hold some true beliefs. I affirm that. If that were true, I'm not saying you can't hold any true beliefs. I'm just saying you cannot rationally infer better or true beliefs over the false beliefs that you've been evolved to hold or causally determined to hold. You can't do it. You have no opportunities to do that. And since that's the case, you have no ability or opportunity to rationally affirm any of your beliefs without begging the question, which is a logical fallacy. So that's not a justification for any of your beliefs. So I do start out with planting his argument. If that's not persuasive, I hit him with the free thinking argument. And I don't think that somebody saying I'm just evolved that way, I don't think that's going to allow them to escape any of the problems here.
Yeah, that's great. What we'll do now is we'll go to a little bit of Q&A for about like 10 minutes or so, and we'll head towards wrapping things up here. We have a question from Kyle Plantinka's Bulldog, which says, Dr. Stratton and I were talking about this earlier today, but could you lay out to the audience how you think Molinism can answer the problem of evil? So what are your thoughts here, Tim?
Yeah, I think Molinism can answer the problem of evil. I've in my book in the last chapter, I discuss how Molinism can account. In fact, I show that only Molinism has access to a specific argument. And I don't just appeal to mere Molinism at this point. I appeal to a soteriological view of Molinism. And I show how it can defeat the problem of natural evil, the problem of moral evil. And I do offer a quick footnote about how I think it can actually defeat the objection raised against the problem of divine hiddenness. And I am in the process of finishing up a paper right now, which I will hopefully be presenting at a conference in a few months on how Molinism defeats the problem of divine hiddenness too. So anyway, I can let's see. I can share. Let me get my book here and see. I'll share one of my favorite arguments here. Here we go. All right. So premise one, if God is omnibenevolent, then he desires genuine eternal love relations with humans. Now, I say in a soteriological view of Molinism that God is omnipotent, he's omniscient, and he is omnibenevolent. So I take a maximally great being approach here. So again, premise one, if God is omnibenevolent, then he desires genuine eternal love relations with humans. Two, if God desires genuine eternal love relations with humans, then he creates humans with libertarian freedom. And I don't think we had a chance to talk about it here today, but I have written about why true love, or at least the best kind of love, requires libertarian freedom. We can talk about that if you'd like, if we have time. Premise three, if God creates humans with libertarian freedom, then he allows humans to experience suffering. Four, God is omnibenevolent. Five, therefore God allows humans to experience suffering. Now, in my book, I unpack why God why God allows this and why suffering is actually good for us. And then I connect that back with 2 Corinthians 4:17, where Paul says these light momentary afflictions, and he's being sarcastic, by the way, because he knew what it meant to suffer probably more than anybody else besides Jesus on the cross. But Paul describes all of our sufferings as light momentary afflictions, and talks about how they prepare us for eternity, how they prepare us for an eternal way of glory. But anyway, I show in this the key premise here, and let me unpack it here, was the third. Well, let me give you the second and third premise here. I'm sorry if I'm a little scatterbrained.
No, you're all good.
Premise, I'll say if God desires genuine eternal love relations with humans, then he creates humans with libertarian freedom, because a genuine eternal love relationship between God and humans necessarily requires that humans possess libertarian freedom. I unpack that. And then next premise, if God creates humans with libertarian freedom, then he allows humans to experience suffering, because suffering can result from from libertarian free humans. That's going to give you moral suffering, or like from the suffering that Hitler might cause, but also because God created a world. This gets us into middle knowledge and Molinism. God created a world in which he knew that unless he permitted moral, natural, and all kinds of evil, maybe even divine hiddenness, that some would not freely choose to eternally preserve the suffering-free state of affairs in the new heavens and the new earth that Paul seems to be referring to in 2 Corinthians 4:17. So I would also point people to a video on my YouTube channel talking about how Doctor Strange in the Avengers helps us understand God's middle knowledge and why he creates us in a world, in a suffering infused world. So if somebody wants to say, why did Doctor Strange create a world in which Tony Stark, where Tony Stark and Black Widow, where they die? Why would Doctor Strange do such a thing? And why would Doctor Strange create a world, one of these possible futures, and make it the actual future where he's hidden and nowhere to be found for a 5-year blip? That doesn't seem like a good hero. Well, actually, we see that he created the only, that he actualized the only possible future in which the evil of Thanos is ultimately defeated. So we all watch the Avengers. Well, at least you are now. Anybody who's watched those two movies, Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame, realizes that Doctor Strange is the ultimate hero, right? Doctor Strange chose a world, even a world that killed him. Now he was raised from the dead, right? But he chose a world in which he would sacrifice his life for his friends and for the sake of humanity and all life. And even though that world was filled with pain, evil, and suffering, to ultimately defeat evil and all suffering. So anyway, I think my argument, combined with good thought experiments, including the Avengers, helps people understand why Molinism can answer the problem of evil. And I plan on unpacking this more in the next year.
That's great. Definitely looking forward to that. We have probably time for one more question here from Ryan Pauly, which is a good one, which says, how would Tim respond to the objection that beliefs are not freely chosen? You can't freely believe that a pink elephant is standing on his head. Maybe actions are free, but not beliefs. I kind of believe there's a pink elephant, an invisible one there, but
I refuse to answer any question from Ryan Pauly.
Well,
I'm just kidding. Ryan's a good friend. We actually work together at in an organization called Maven, and we were just on a Zoom call together last night. So anyway, Ryan, it's good to hear from you, and that's a good question. So this gets us into something in the philosophy called doxastic voluntarism. So there is a view called direct doxastic voluntarism, which says that I can choose any of my beliefs at any time, willy-nilly. Whatever I decide to believe, that's what I'm going to believe. And so, Ryan's saying, well, can you freely choose to actually to believe that there's a pink elephant on my head right now? Now, no, I can't. But what if I said, well, yeah, I believe that. And he goes, no, you don't. You're not being honest. And now, but what if I really wanted to believe it? Let's say Ryan was going to give me $1 billion if I could really believe that there is a pink elephant standing on my head. Now, of course, I want to believe that more than anything, but I just can't make myself do it. Even if $1 billion is on the line. Now I could lie, but then he straps me up to a lie detector test and I fail because of course I really don't believe it. But we're not talking about those kinds of beliefs. We're talking about the freedom to put myself in a position to ultimately lead to some other belief. So I can decide. It seems that I could freely decide what will I be open. Could the atheist say, I am not going to consider any arguments for theism, no matter what I hear. No, if it's the Kalam or what, I'm just going to reject it. Right? I think that I have talked to many of these folks. Like, I don't care what premise you give me, I will find a way to defeat each premise. Right? They seem to be committed to that before they even hear it. But I've also talked to some atheists who, like the evolutionary biologist who was an atheist, and now she helps me with the Ratio Christi chapter on the campus. But like her, I think I challenged her to do this. I said, look, I want you to take your thoughts captive, and not only your thoughts, I want you to take your wants captive, right? I don't think you want Christianity to be true, but I respectfully challenge you to be open to the arguments and see where the evidence leads. So one can decide before you directly choose a belief or not, to say, you can be like, I am not going to consider any argument for God's existence, or I will consider it. I'll be open to your line of argumentation and see what happens. So did she there decide her belief? No, but she chose to take some walls down, as it were, that then allowed her to follow the evidence to ultimately persuade her, and perhaps that causally determined one's belief. Now, I think that God has created us in such a way that we also can choose some beliefs, or maybe not beliefs. Look, my argument is not called the free believing argument. It's called the free thinking argument. So I argue for the ability to, am I the one that judges and evaluates certain concepts and premises and arguments, or does something or someone else do that for me? So there's two different ways of looking at this. When it comes to beliefs, I don't argue for direct doxastic voluntarism. I argue for indirect doxastic voluntarism. But when it comes to thinking, as long as I am not causally determined by something or someone else, and I am doing the judging and the weighing, then I possess, then I'm a free thinker in a libertarian sense. So I don't know if that answers Ryan's question sufficiently, but that's
you can never please Ryan. It's like the number one rule of free thinking. Tim, thank you so much for your time. It's been so much fun talking about these and exploring these ideas with you. Do you have any kind of like last thoughts, things you didn't get to say before we start to wrap things up here?
Well, so much I wanted to say, but you just,
it's all my fault. Just blame me.
No, I think I would just encourage people to go check out my other content. Definitely check out the book and the YouTube channel and the blog articles that I write on the website. I go into many more of these topics and more depth, especially even getting into the topic of why the best kind of love requires libertarian freedom. So I encourage people to go check that out.
Yeah, that's great. And I thank you everyone who tuned in today. Obviously, we didn't get through all the questions, and there were so many things that we could have explored. But hopefully, we got you like a little taste of everything that you can get if you go subscribe to Free Thinking Ministries and check out his book and all these great things. So I encourage you to go follow Tim, subscribe to his channel, all that stuff. There's a link down below where you can connect with him, see what's going on. And if you're new to the channel, I always encourage you to subscribe to Adherent Apologetics. So whether you're listening via YouTube or podcast, you can follow us on social media. And if you enjoy the show, you can support us on patreon.com/adherent apologetics or become a YouTube member. It starts as little as $1 a month, and your support goes a long way. So I appreciate that as well. But Tim, thank you so much for your time. It's been so much fun.
Thank you, Zach. I had a blast.
And thank you everyone who tuned in. Ryan, TJ, what's the takeaway? Susan, everyone else, have a good one and God bless.